Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. Welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt.
My name is Dyl, and today we have something I think very exciting here on the show. We've done a Nolan tier list. Now, it's only right that we continue with the man of cinema himself, Martin Scorsese. Matt, are you excited?
I am absolutely stoked for this. This might be a controversial list that we're about to make here because, people love all of his movies, and we're going to be placing them all over the place. Now, this tier list may be a little bit skewed differently because obviously it's Scorsese. He's one of the GOATs. He is one of the greatest to ever do it. And so a Scorsese D tier might be a little bit different from most other people's D tiers, but we have to have a D tier. We can't just not put anything low. If you're upset about anything, this is just our opinions. We're going to talk about all of these movies and try to figure out where we're kind of falling on these different films. So how are you feeling about this, Dylan?
I'm super interested to dive in. I know I'm going to have one glaring omission from my list, but besides that, I feel like I'm pretty excited to say some because I think I do also have some spicy Scorsese takes as well.
It's going to be spicy, and people are going to be mad at us like they were last time with Christopher Nolan, but let's get right into it. First off, we're gonna start in 1967 with Scorsese's first film, which I've seen. It's not very good. I'm gonna glaze over this one super quick. It's called Who's That Knocking at My Door? This was his directorial debut, and I'm gonna put this right down in the D tier. It's like a student film. It's not very good, so that's a very easy D tier, and Dylan hasn't seen this, but Dylan has seen Mean Streets, 1973, so where are you going to place Mean Streets?
I will also put that down in the D tier. It's not a bad movie, but compared to other Scorsese, it's not one that you're like, oh, I want to go rewatch Mean Streets. It's one of his best. He's doing this amazingly well. When we talked about the movie a few months ago, I very much did like the soundtrack for it, but that's really the only thing that stuck with me after watching the movie.
On the other hand, I'll put it in the C tier. I'm also not a huge fan of Mean Streets. Like I mentioned with Who's That Knocking at My Door, it feels very student filmy. I do like the themes. We really start to see what Martin Scorsese wants to do in this genre, kind of looking at the nature of evil and the relationship between violence and religion here. It's very interesting what he's doing, but it's not as polished as he would go on to do later. While this might be a B tier in some other directors' filmography, it's got to be a C tier for Martin Scorsese. So let's move on to Taxi Driver, which, Dylan, you haven't seen Taxi Driver still.
I haven't. The VHS is sitting right over there in the other room. I just haven't found time. I don't know how I haven't found time. It's been a movie that I've wanted to watch for a long time. It's just there's always something that gets in the way. I would have loved to see it in prep for this video, but I haven't. But I would guess it would probably go A or S just based off of everything I know about it.
Well, I can confirm for you this goes at the tippity-tip top of the S tier. This is one of the greatest films ever made. It is truly a masterpiece that, in my opinion, this is what really put Scorsese in the conversation with the legends. It was a very early work, and he just kept it up from there. It's so easy when you release something like this so early career to kind of get swept aside, because how do you ever live up to Taxi Driver? But he did again and again and again, and he still is. I can't wait to hear your thoughts on it when you finally get to watch the film. But let's move on to a film that you have seen, The Last Waltz, a concert documentary about the band, which released in 1978. Personally, I'd put this in the A tier. I think this is one of the best concert movies of all time, and it's a departure from the typical Scorsese movie that shows what range he has. So Dylan, where are you going to fall on The Last Waltz?
The Last Waltz is one where I'm kind of confused of where to put it, because in the grand scheme of Scorsese's movies, I don't think it's S. I don't think it's A, but it's still very good for what it is. So I think I'll be a little nice here. I think I'm going to put it in the B tier for me.
I can see that in the B tier. Maybe it's not as impactful as other Scorsese movies, but it's a damn good time. And speaking of movies that are not a damn good time, we got Raging Bull from 1980. Now, this is easily one of his most influential films, and if you look at rankings of great movies, this often comes out in the top 50, top 30 movies ever made. Now, do I completely agree with that? Not entirely. You know, I don't find Jake LaMotta's life outside of the ring as fascinating or as compelling to watch as I do inside the ring. But the influence of this film is undeniable. Robert De Niro's performance is one of the greatest he's ever done. The editing, the use of music is magnificent. And of course, the cinematography in this film is just unparalleled. It's magnificent. I gotta put Raging Bull in the A tier. It is not a tippity top Scorsese movie for me, but the influence is undeniable.
I completely agree with everything that you just said. De Niro is a marvel in this. The cinematography may be the best in Scorsese's career. That black and white, you just can't get enough of it. But for me, I would give this movie a solid to light 8 out of 10. And for me, I think that's perfectly placed into the B tier. Probably upper B tier once we go further into this. But I'm going to be a little bit lower and having the B tier for now.
Let's move on to King of Comedy. 1982. This was a major flop for Scorsese, interestingly enough, which is crazy because now it's a pretty influential film that people really think back on. But at the time, people hated this movie. I think coming off of Taxi Driver and Raging Bull, maybe people were expecting this to be a massive Oscar player, and it just didn't end up being that. But despite that, you know, it's got great performances from Jerry Lewis, from Robert De Niro. Personally, I don't think this has as much influence as something like Raging Bull, and I'd put it on the same tier as Raging Bull. But since the influence is a little bit less with this film, I'm going to put this as a strong, very high B tier.
I think this will be one of our first major departures because this is going right to the top of A tier for me. I just saw this movie for the first time a few weeks ago and fell in love with it. I think this has my favorite Robert De Niro performance in it. I think the comedy in this movie hits. It's paced super well, and Jerry Lewis, as you mentioned, delivers another great role here. King of Comedy just really worked for me. I get why some people aren't as high on it, but for me, it's basically everything I wanted from a movie like this.
Honestly, you want to hear my hot take here?
Yeah, let's hear it.
I prefer Joker.
I do too. Joker is a 10 out of 10.
Okay, but let's get controversial now. Shall we get controversial, Dylan?
I think that we should because it's Scorsese.
Ooh.
He's always pushing the boundaries, and you know what? This next one, it pushed the boundaries, just not in a way that I think either of us really, connected with.
Dude, people are going to yell at us about this one. After Hours, 1985, we're both going to put this in D tier.
Yes,
my
we will.
God.
I'm going to put it above Mean Streets in D tier, but still, it's down in D tier for me. I get it, but at the same time, it just really didn't click for me. I just was kind of bored throughout watching. Like, something cool would happen, and then they kind of just throw it away to do something else. And I get that's the point. It's the plot. It just didn't really connect with me. I did appreciate that it was only 90 minutes, so it wasn't super, super long. But still, at 90 minutes, I felt like that should have brisked by a lot faster than what it did.
I gotta apologize on this one because I haven't seen this movie in probably over 10 years. This movie did nothing for me at the time, and I haven't revisited it since. Maybe having it in D tier is just wrong because I haven't seen it in such a long time, and I haven't been able to see if my opinion on the film has changed. But at this point, it is a D tier, and maybe I'll rewatch it in the coming months or years, and my opinion will 180 on it. But for now, as much as I do think this movie's very influential, I don't think we'd get Uncut Gems or any of the Safdie brothers' work without After Hours, or a lot of other anxiety cinema like Shiva Baby we wouldn't have without this. Even with its influence, I don't know, I'm torn because I know that this movie was not one that clicked with me personally, but I do see the influence. So maybe I'll switch it up to a C tier, even though...
Don't conform. Stay with the D. Be bold.
Because I'm thinking of the influence of the film now. Acknowledging the fact that I haven't seen this movie in such a long time, it'll be bottom of the C tier. So let's move on to the next one, The Color of Money from 1986. This is a sequel to one of my favorite sports movies of all time, which was The Hustler, starring Paul Newman. Amazing movie, The Hustler. The Color of Money is the sequel to that, and Paul Newman is now an old man. and Tom Cruise comes in to learn the game of pool from him. Paul Newman won the Oscar for this movie. The only reason I can really think of why he won that Oscar is that he was old and a legend in Hollywood, and they were like, yeah, we'll give it to him for playing an iconic role that he played in the 60s, and now it's 25 years later, and here he is. But The Color of Money it's just fine. There's nothing really to say about this. It's a D tier for me. It's so unmemorable. But you know what's not unmemorable? Bad. The music video from Michael Jackson, 1987. What do you think about this music video, Dylan?
I think it's pretty fun, and while obviously it's not Michael Jackson's most iconic or best made music video, I think of the bad music video comes on like TV, like during MTV days, which are a little before our time, but like if that came on, I would sit down and watch the full thing. I wouldn't change the channel. Obviously, it's not Scorsese's peak thing or anything, but I think it's worthy of being on here because it was one of the first like cinematic music videos, and I think it's, like I said, it's just a fun time. So I would put it in the C tier.
I'll go D tier. And that's not for lack of enjoyment. It's a music video, and it's not a music video that made a particular impact on me. Like, it's not Thriller. You know, if we're talking Michael Jackson music videos, I don't think the bad music video is all that iconic. When we're ranking it amongst other Scorsese films, it's a music video. It's not really, I don't know. So it goes D tier for me. But let's hit the first one that I won't be able to talk about, that you will be able to talk about. Last Temptation of Christ, released in 1988. And I have not seen this movie, but Dylan, you have. What's your take?
Honestly, this is not Scorsese's best religious movie or movie dealing with Christianity as a whole, but I think it was a great gateway for him. He tackles the subject head on. It has some of Scorsese's most interesting directorial choices, which surprisingly enough, he was the lone nomination for this movie at the Oscar. So when you think about, solo director nominations, Scorsese's one of those with this film. And Last Temptation of Christ, I'm not going to put it super high, but I'm going to put it in the solid B tier range.
This is topping my list of shame. I've been trying to watch this movie for years, and I've just never ended up doing it. I really hope to change that very soon.
People would probably be more mad at me for not seeing Taxi Driver than you for Last Temptation of Christ. So I will be your deity. I will be your martyr. I'll stand up there while they attack me so you can get off the hook.
Let's move to Goodfellas. We're now into the 90s with maybe the most iconic gangster movie of all time. And I think we could both agree on this one, right? 3, 2, 1.
Send it to the top. Send it to the top.
S tier. S tier. Not just for how good of a movie this is, because it is a fantastic movie. It is also for the undeniable influence of everything that came after this. This switched up the genre from what we knew in The Godfather to being Scorsese's. It's a great movie. It's got great performances. And yeah, it's a clear S tier for me.
De Niro, Liotta, Pesci, all are phenomenal. And like you said, the influence here is unmatched. I think with your case for After Hours down below of how you had to move it up here, even if Goodfellas wasn't a great movie on its own, its influence would just bring it all the way up to the top here. But this is one of, if not Scorsese's best. I personally put it like number 3. Well, I know a lot of people who would die on a hill saying it's number 1.
So let's move on to 1991, Cape Fear, which I just watched last week for the very first time. And I gotta put this in the B tier. It is a great time. It is a really fun movie with a great Robert De Niro performance, a fantastic Elmer Bernstein score. It takes Scorsese into a very film noir direction that we don't normally see from him. We're on a little bit of a streak.
It's gonna be a long list.
It's gonna be a long list of movies that I've seen that you haven't seen, Dylan. But the next one up is The Age of Innocence from 1993, which is going into my gosh darn S tier. Oh my god, The Age of Innocence is highly underappreciated. It is one that I think a lot of people just overlook. This should have been nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. In fact, I think it won a lot of trifecta awards from critics groups that year. So to me, looking back, how this was not included in the Best Picture lineup in 1993 is shocking to me. But this is so much more than a stuffy period costume drama as we would expect to see from something like this. But Scorsese takes this story of high society in New York City and he makes it his own. And he packs it with these themes of desire and being torn between what's best versus what we want most. It is a fascinating film. It's virtuosically made. The costume design, cinematography, music, brilliant. Performances from Daniel Day-Lewis, Michelle Pfeiffer, Winona Ryder are all impeccable. This is a clear S tier for me. And the only reason that I think it's not S tier for most people is that it is criminally underseen. Then 1995, we have Casino, which is an A-tier movie. I'm just gonna say right off the bat, this is just a slightly less influential version of Goodfellas, right along the same vein that Goodfellas was. It is a gangster movie that feels like an epic that spans decades. 10 out of 10 for me. I think it's a blast. But if I look at it up against Goodfellas and see the influence of the two films, Goodfellas does come out on top. Then Kundun from 1997. This one, people might not even know this exists, but it's got Roger Deakins cinematography. It has a Philip Glass score, which is excellent. Really, the craft work on this film is magnificent. Now, that said, it's not the most engaging film on a storytelling level, so while the craft of it may be absolutely incredible, I couldn't tell you what it's about. I do like this film a lot, and the craft, it's gonna make me put it at the top of the C tier. Then, oh my god, Dylan, you've barely seen any 90s Scorsese. We're getting to the end of the 90s, Bringing Out the Dead, 1999. This is a Nicolas Cage paramedic thriller. It follows Nick Cage driving around in an ambulance from place to place over the course of 3 nights, and this is chaos. It is very heart-pounding. It is not an easy film to watch, but it is incredibly engaging, and I think it actually does what After Hours was trying to do better than what After Hours did. It's a great film with a great Nicolas Cage performance, and this is gonna go in my B tier.
Well, I finally get to chime in again because in 2002, Scorsese came out with Gangs of New York, which from this point on, I think I've seen every Scorsese motion picture for the rest of the way. But Gangs of New York is going right to the bottom, at the bottom of C tier. I have never really been a fan of this movie. It was one of the first Scorsese movies I did see because when I first got into movies around like 2014, 2015, DiCaprio was my favorite actor. So I was like watching all these DiCaprio movies and I saw Gangs of New York. I was like, this is kind of just mid. There's nothing overtly bad about it, but nothing really sticks out to me either. Like, the production design's cool, the costume work, yeah, but like the cinematography looks kind of washed out. The script kind of seemed all over the place, at least to me then. I haven't watched this in maybe like 5 or 6 years, but it was just one that never really screamed out to watch again. But it doesn't make sense because you have Leo, Daniel Day-Lewis, Cameron Diaz, John C. Reilly, Liam Neeson. I'm sure there's other people in it too. Those are just the ones that I know off the top of my head. But yeah, this would probably be near the bottom of my Scorsese overall. It's just I've recently watched Mean Streets After Hours, so they've been replaced now for my least favorite Scorsese project.
I also am not too hot on Gangs of New York. It's gonna go mid to low C tier. I think it's a decent film. It has great crafts. The production design, costume design, very good. Daniel Day-Lewis is giving a fantastic performance in this. But yeah, it's bloated, and at the same time, it also feels like it's been chopped to shit. It's not one of his finest films. It's just fine. Not bad. Not great. It's just okay, and that's why it's a C tier. Next up, we've got The Aviator from 2004. And Scorsese, at this point, this is his second Best Picture nomination in a row. How do you feel about The Aviator?
The Aviator's a movie I feel very similar to like Raging Bull, where I think there's a great lead performance. The movie around it's not as strong, but I still very much enjoy what I'm watching. I'd put these both in the very top of B tier. So Raging Bull's number 1, Aviator's now number 2. DiCaprio is great in this, as he is in most collaborations with Scorsese. I would put Gangs of New York aside, but the rest of it, I just really liked the cinematography. I thought this was very fast paced as well. For being on the longer side, I think this is just another example of Thelma Shoemaker's just great editing skills of making longer movies feel a lot shorter than they actually are. Something you can say about almost every other movie from here on out. I just think this is another example of that.
I like The Aviator a lot too. I'm gonna put it in the B tier as well. DiCaprio is fantastic in this. The production design is great. Now I am curious what would have happened if we'd never got this movie, because did you know that Christopher Nolan was working on a Howard Hughes movie before The Aviator came out? Nolan's Howard Hughes movie was supposed to star Jim Carrey.
Yeah, I'm glad that we got Scorsese and Leo instead.
The film was supposed to be called The Keys to the Street. That would have been fascinating, but I think what we got with The Aviator was really, really well done. Cate Blanchett is also really amazing in this as Katharine Hepburn. You can't complain with The Aviator. It's a very good movie. Maybe not one of his most memorable films, but yeah, it's totally up there. It's a really well done film. But let's move to 2006. Scorsese finally wins Best Picture with The Departed. Some people say he should not have won with this. He should have won beforehand. Maybe we can agree with that. Maybe we can say that he should have won for Goodfellas or for Taxi Driver or something else in that time. Maybe Raging Bull. But The Departed, I think it's undeniable. This deserved it in 2006. And to me, this is a clear S tier. What a fantastic, entertaining film with great performances. The writing is spectacular. It is engaging from front to back. It is endlessly rewatchable. Anytime I get a chance to watch this, I will watch it the entire way through, and I will not feel bored or distracted for a single second. This is an incredible film. It is also a massive improvement from the original film that it's remaking. It's a remake of a Hong Kong movie called Infernal Affairs, and this is leagues better. Like, it doesn't feel like they're even in the same realm. The Departed is a masterpiece. S tier. S tier. Easy.
So you know how Goodfellas is currently my only S tier? Well, move that aside. Departed becomes my new number one at the moment. And when I talked about when I first got into movies and Leo was my favorite actor, the reason why Gangs of New York was such a disappointment was because I watched that right after watching The Departed. And like you just mentioned, The Departed is a great movie across the board. It is so well, and I can understand, like you said, like if you think he should have won for something before, but that doesn't knock The Departed. The Departed is a great Best Picture winner. It's so fun, so entertaining. The mystery keeps you on the edge of your seat all the way up until the last shot, and that last scene is so insane, especially the first time that you watch it. DiCaprio was great. Matt Damon is someone who I think gets a lot of hate, but he's really good in this movie as well. Jack Nicholson is amazing. And you know what? Mark Wahlberg, he's pretty good in this too. You can't find another movie in his catalog that has the same like energy and vibes that The Departed has. There's a lot of bold choices made throughout. Well, yeah, you have other gangster movies like Goodfellas, but Goodfellas is done in the more conventional Scorsese style, where I think The Departed takes a few more risks with how it's telling the story visually and on the script.
Now let's move on to Shutter Island 2010. This is a twisty thriller, and honestly, if we're talking departures from Scorsese's normal style, Shutter Island is a massive departure. He's never made a movie that feels like it before, and he's never made one that feels like it ever since. And apparently he was not too happy with how the shoot went down, and he has said he's never made another studio movie since then, because I think he felt that the studio interfered a little bit too much with Shutter Island. But still, it is a great movie with some great twists and turns, and a fantastic Leonardo DiCaprio performance, great use of music, great production design. I'm going to put this solidly in the A tier. I love this film.
I'm also going to put it in the A tier just because I don't want my S tier to be filled of movies, and currently I only have The King of Comedy in A, so Shutter Island is like the highest A that you can get. I echo everything that you just said about the production design. Is great. DiCaprio is amazing in this. With a thriller like this and with a mystery movie, one thing that can bog them down is just like you don't care what ends up happening. Like once you find the resolution, like, oh, I don't want to go back to watch it. But once you find out what happened, you're like, oh, I need to just go back, put this right back into the DVD player, Netflix, however you're watching, and be like, okay, let's see where the little cues are at throughout to really give me the hint for what this major twist is at the end of the movie.
It's insanely rewatchable because it makes you want to figure out what little breadcrumbs you missed along the way. But let's move on to 2011. Right after Shutter Island, he made Hugo, which is, unpopular opinion, one of my favorite movies of all time. For me, this is a clear S tier as well. I know I've got a lot of S tiers, but it's Martin Scorsese. What can I say? People out there are gonna say to me something along the lines of, oh, it's so mid in comparison to his other movies. It's so forgettable. No, No. You know what I feel about Hugo is not only is this one of his best made movies, the cinematography is gorgeous and lush and vibrant, and the production design, he turns Paris, the streets of Paris, a Paris train station, into a playground with clockwork just whirring around and machinery on all angles and steam coming out of everywhere. The production design is gorgeous. But above all else, this feels like one of Scorsese's most personal films because it is so evidently a love letter from a father to a daughter. He was raising Francesca at the time. He is trying to be able to share what he has spent his life doing. That is a beautiful thing to me. To have someone who has made his career doing very graphic, very violent films, to suddenly turn around and make something that is directly about his relationship with his daughter, making himself in the movie Georges Méliès, one of the pioneers of cinema. So not only is this a father-daughter story, this is also a film about the love of film, about how cinema is magic. It is such a beautiful movie, and it's one that I think is incredibly rewatchable. I've probably seen this upwards of 10 times. I think it's magical. One of the best kids movies ever made. Dylan, I know you don't love it as much as I do, but one day you will. You'll see eventually.
I think I could grow to love this movie. I think everything that you just said was very well spoken. My issue with Hugo is I watched this at home on a very small TV screen. I think if I saw this in a theater with a re-release or just in a more good environment, I could like this movie more. So for me, it's at the top of C tier, but I don't disagree with anything that you just said. I think the production design is great. The music choices in this movie are spot on. The cast does their best. It's just, I didn't have the best viewing experience for this, which I think maybe tainted this, because I feel Hugo's a movie that you need a big screen or in a good sound system to really take in the world building environments where if you're watching like a little small TV at home, you may not get as much out of it.
Now, I would say Hugo works really well at home, but I can see how maybe nostalgia has clouded my view of this, because I first saw this film when I was 13 years old. It was a film that I think really transported me, especially as a kid who was getting into movies at the time. This inspired me to check out silent films. Now, let's move on to the polar opposite of Hugo. He made the most child-friendly movie of his career and then the least child-friendly movie of his career.
He had to make up for it. He took a movie off.
And he doubled down because this is the raunchiest movie of all time, The Wolf of Wall Street, 2013. Actually, I think this one might still hold the record for the most use of the word fuck in a narrative film. I think the only two films that beat it in the use of the word are two documentaries specifically about swearing in movies. It has gone down as a classic in his filmography. So I think we could both agree on this one, right?
Yeah, it's going straight up to S for me, and The Departed gets replaced at number 1 because of The Wolf of Wall Street is currently my new number 1. You talk about Hugo being magical. I remember watching Wolf of Wall Street for the first time and just being in awe of how grand this movie is, how funny it is, how engaging, how fast-paced it is. Again, Thelma Shoemaker is great at what she does. Who would have guessed? And the ensemble here is amazing. McConaughey steals the show in that first act, and then it becomes all about Leo and Jonah Hill. Margot Robbie comes in and is great, and everyone from top to bottom of this movie is just giving one of, if not the best performance in their career.
Yeah, this is a great one that harkens back to Goodfellas, because in Goodfellas, it's so easy to see these people as gangsters. They are murderers, they are killers, and it's easy to indict their crimes because it doesn't look fun. On the other hand, Wolf of Wall Street is doing the exact same thing, right? Where it is indicting these people, it is showing their lifestyle, showing their crimes, showing the way that they hurt other people. But in this one, it shows how easy it is to get sucked into that life. And I think that's what this movie does best. It brings you in. It shows the almost seduction of that life. I've seen people criticize this movie as like an endorsement of Jordan Belfort. Honestly, I don't see that at all. This is it is so clear that Scorsese and everyone involved in this movie hates this man's guts, but they are committed to showing exactly how people can fall into that lifestyle just because it looks fun. I think it's very clear that you're not meant to idolize these people.
And it's so interesting to see how a movie can be like misconstrued by a certain like group of people, because like obviously Scorsese and the team went out to make Belfort not look good. And like, yeah, you can understand why people get involved with this, but at the end of the day, it never works out for them. And certain people take away from this movie like, oh, he's so cool, I want to be just like him, blah blah blah. But Wolf of Wall Street, I think, is a technically well-made movie from top to bottom. And like I said, I think almost everyone involved with this cast gets one of their best performances to date.
Now let's move on to 2016. We got Silence, a criminally underseen movie. I don't know what the hell happened with the distributor, but they just dropped the ball. This didn't even play in theaters near me. I remember waiting and waiting and waiting for the new Scorsese movie, only for it to never play in my area. Now, this one hasn't remained one of the most memorable films, although it is incredibly well made. The cinematography is gorgeous. Performances, specifically Andrew Garfield, he got an Oscar nomination for Hacksaw Ridge this year, when he should have gotten it for this film instead. Silence is a very well done movie, but I can't put it any higher than the B tier personally. And I know that's gonna hurt you because this might be your favorite Scorsese movie, right?
Yes, like you just said, Silence is my favorite Martin Scorsese movie, but I also think I'm a little biased when it comes to this as well, because this was my first Scorsese movie in a theater. It had been my only Scorsese movie in a theater until I recently saw Killers of the Flower Moon. I think just the story that goes into how this movie came to be is so captivating, because this is a story that Scorsese has wanted to tell for decades, and it never felt like the right time to him. And I'm glad that he waited on it, because I think the product that we got was perfect. It seemed like there was years of planning that went into it, perfecting the script, finding the best possible actors for each one of these roles. And I very much just love the direction that Scorsese uses. He doesn't go with tights a lot. He stays wide, and you get to really bask in the brutality and the tragedies that are going on, and you can see firsthand how it's affecting not just the missionaries, but the people who have to live with this each and every day.
It's crazy to think of a modern Scorsese movie getting so largely snubbed at the Oscars, but it did get one nomination, and that was cinematography. And like you said, I think we can both agree that was a very deserved nomination. Gorgeous wide shots, like you were just saying. Let's move forward to 2019. But first, no, not The Irishman. We're gonna talk a little bit about Rolling Thunder Review, the Bob Dylan documentary that released in 2019 on Netflix. I won't talk too much about this. It is a D-tier movie for me. I don't know exactly what it was trying to do, whether it was trying to be more of a concert doc or a profile on Bob Dylan, or whether it was just meant to be about this tour. And to me, I didn't really succeed at any of those things. And The Irishman also came out in 2019. This one is widely seen as a classic now, and it's almost like a closing chapter to Scorsese's gangster movie days. But I don't think either of us are as hot on this as most people out there are.
I know for a fact I'm not, because I always get clowned on our Discord when I put this at the bottom of my 2019 Best Picture nominations. Irishman, I think, is a very well-made movie. My issue is, as much as I talk about Thelma Shoemaker's amazing editing skills, this movie is one where I think it does feel its runtime, and maybe this movie was a lot longer and she chopped it down, but I feel like there are definitely some cuts to be happened in this movie. I think the ensemble here is great, as in most Scorsese movies, and it's kind of funny. I love Jesse Plemons as an actor, but now he's been in two Scorsese movies that both kind of let me down a little bit.
Spoiler.
Little interesting thing there. A little spoiler, but this one is going to go at the bottom of my B tier. I very much appreciate this movie more than I enjoy it. So I guess it's kind of like your After Hours argument from before, where it maybe is a D tier for you, but you moved it up to C. I have Irishman at the very, very bottom of my B, where it's most likely at top of my C.
I am also going to put this at the very bottom of my B tier. There's parts of it that I think are fantastic. For example, the final hour is magnificent, and it's some of Scorsese's best work. Everything after what happens in Jimmy Hoffa's house, I think, is magnificent. It's a meditation on death. We build empires out of sand. It's this story of people who spend their entire lives hurting other people just to get more power, and then they lose their power anyways, because time takes no prisoners, and time is truly the most ruthless killer of all. That final hour is brilliant. It's breathtaking, where we just see everything that these people have worked for disappear into nothing, slipping through their fingers because none of it mattered. And they spent their whole life being miserable, hateful people, and nothing was to show for it. And in a way, it almost feels like a meditation on art, too, because Scorsese has spent his entire life making these films And what does it matter when he's growing old and it'll all disappear one day anyways? And here's my theory, but I think the ending is the best ending that Scorsese has ever put on film, where we have this sad old man being left in a room, and he says, when you leave, can you leave the door open? And to me, that's a closing of a chapter in cinema history. Because if I think back to the modern gangster movie being made with Al Pacino, with Robert De Niro, I think back to The Godfather. And what happens at the end of The Godfather? They close the door. And at the end of The Irishman, they say, please leave the door open. Anyways, that's enough of me ranting about how much I love the ending of The Irishman, because the ending of The Irishman is a 10 out of 10. It is a 10 out of 10 final hour, but everything leading up to that is a 6, 7 out of 10. I think the visual effects making these old men look young is garbage. The scene where Robert De Niro kicks the dude on the ground is terrible. The score is distracting. The visual look of it is just murky and it's not nice. So to me, this is a bottom of the B tier. That's how I feel on The Irishman. You can yell at me if you want, but keep in mind, I do love the ending, so I'm not all bad.
Yeah, the ending, I think you make some great points that I hadn't really thought about leaving the door open. The thing I think is the best of The Irishman is Jimmy Hoffa. I think he very much keeps the story alive and keeps you entertained throughout, because as you mentioned, those first 2 hours, the pacing, the look, everything that's going into it just looks a little off or feels a little slow, but...
And there's no energy to it except for Al Pacino. Al Pacino is the
Al Pacino's
energy.
Performance just breathes through the screen. And I'm so glad that he got Oscar recognition here. Like, I can understand the De Niro snub. Joe Pesci getting in, I wasn't really a fan of, but I get why. But Pacino, he was so good, and any other year I would have wanted him to win. It's just there was a few better performances that year, but I'm just glad that he got recognition, because let alone just being funny, he just nails the character, nails the persona, and you believe everything that's going around his character.
And he didn't feel old for most of it. Whereas, like, Joe Pesci, from the first second he's on screen, I'm like, that is an old man. That is an old man. What? He's supposed to be 25? That's an old man. My most controversial take is I think Joe Pesci was straight up bad in The Irishman. Not, I don't think he deserved the nomination. Like, I think he was actually the worst part of the movie. And that being because it felt like he was sleepwalking through the entire film. Like, he was so tired. And a lot of people say, oh, it was a subtle performance. No, he seemed exhausted the entire time. And when he was supposed to be a young man, I'm like, this is an old man who is too tired to do his job. Maybe that's really controversial, but this was nominated in, 10 categories at the Oscars in 2019? And if I were to rank every single one of those categories, The Irishman would be dead last in every single category that it was in, except for Al Pacino.
Wow. I mean, because dead last is his co-star.
Stuff like costume design, cinematography, editing, all dead last. Screenplay, dead last. So that's my take on The Irishman. It is a B tier because of the ending. Again, magnificent, but otherwise, it's lower. It's much lower. Could even be a D tier if it was just the first 2 hours of the movie, but I'm not going to go that far. After that, I'll talk very quickly about a mini-series that Scorsese put out in 2021 called Pretend It's a City. This came out on Netflix. It is so funny. It's a documentary mini-series which follows along Fran Lebowitz as she just talks about life and has chats with Martin Scorsese. It is delightful. It is a really fun show to watch. Fran Lebowitz is hilarious. Watching her complain about modern life in New York is just wonderful. And we see Scorsese on screen a lot, and just seeing that man laugh brings me joy. Now, is this miniseries as impactful as his other work? No. But it's going to go very solidly pretty close to the top of my C tier.
That brings us to our brand new Martin Scorsese movie. The whole reason why we are doing this tier list, Killers of the Flower Moon. If you have not seen this movie, go watch it. If you have seen the movie, we're not going to talk spoilers here, but we're going to have a spoiler review. Matt, I feel like you and I kind of feel the same, while I'm a little bit warmer on it.
You might be more generous with it. I think I'm going to take the more controversial stance, and I'm going to put it in the C tier personally.
Okay, so I am a little warmer.
A lot of the problems I have with The Irishman, I also have here. I think the pacing drags quite a lot. The cinematography, I think, is very murky looking. It does not look good in my mind. The score, is so dated. It feels like it was made in like the 70s or 80s. Sorry, Robbie Robertson. I love you. I love the band. Your music did not fit this film. But my main issue with the film is the perspective. There's a video that's going around right now from the language and cultural advisor on the film, one of the Osage that was helping on the movie, and it's him talking about his thoughts on the movie, which is how it's slightly troubling to tell a story like this from the perspective of the killers. While, yes, it is an interrogation on the nature of evil and the nature of how long we as anyone in society can be complicit with racism, it is asking a lot of those interesting questions. But I do feel like the more interesting story here would be Molly's story. I feel like the Osage were kind of pushed to the side in the film, and that to me is a little troubling. A lot of people are going to disagree with me on that. I know it's doing a lot of very smart things in how it interrogates. I think the ending is fantastic. Now, I do plan on seeing it again, and that could change.
I feel kind of the same I did for The Irishman, just a little bit better in all instances here with Kills of the Flower Moon. I do want to preface by saying my theater had some sort of audio issue. I don't know if that's the movie itself or the theater I was in, so that affected my viewing experience and definitely made this movie feel the 3.5 hours. Because, like, for example, The Way of Water, that felt like an hour and a half. Oppenheimer felt like an hour and a half. Those did not feel like 3-hour movies. Babylon even. But with Killers, almost instantly I could tell the audio sounded quiet. I'm like, oh, this is going to be a long 3.5 hours. Yeah. That aside, though, I think the technical work on this movie is great. Production design, costumes, that all very much bodes through. The performances, I think, are very good across the board. I don't think anything's truly exceptional, but they all are very well. But I would give this solid B tier. It would be right underneath Last Temptation of Christ, but above The Last Waltz, with the potential to move up or possibly move more towards Irishman at that very bottom of B, top of C.
That brings us to the very end of this Martin Scorsese tier list. Now, we, of course, missed a few films. There's some movies that we just haven't seen. For example, New York, New York, Boxcar Bertha, A Personal Journey with Martin Scorsese Through American Movies, his George Harrison movie. There's so many films that Martin Scorsese's done that we still have yet to experience, and I look forward to maybe one day coming back and doing another one of these when Scorsese's next movie drops, and maybe we will have filled in some of those gaps.
I definitely will have Taxi Driver by then. I got like 4 years because his movies never hit their release date. He's like James Cameron. You're going to get pushed by an extra 2 years or whatever you're supposed to come out.
Thank you guys so much for watching this video. We really want to hear what you think. If you like this content, make sure you subscribe. We're dropping new film content, Oscar content every single day. Thank you so much for watching. As always, my name is Matt.
My name is Dyl, and this is Fantasy Filmball.